to your mother. It's time for another episode of Birds with Friends. Just some high-flying, ran fast vertical stems of professors from Penn watching eagles eat and pray like Pazookies on birthdays. It's Philadelphia, Marissa, Bo, and Zach kicking it. Cooler than 3 penguins till Zach runs off with his valet keys. He's a real nuanced goose. Pull up a branch, get loose. It's time for some juice on some
Birds with Friends.
The early bird gets the worm but prefers getting turned like a turn on some
Birds with Friends.
Marissa, Bo, and Zach are here to squawk. Don't miss the mistress talk on some.
I don't call it the off season. I call it the non-playing season.
Is that what you say when people, normies ask you about what you do in the off season? You say it's not the off season, it's the non-playing season?
I don't correct them, but I'll call it the non-playing season.
Okay.
I'll feel like there's the playing season.
The NPO.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Birds with Friends on a Wednesday afternoon. Bo Wulf, no Zach Berman, no Marissa Dunn. Instead, very pleased to be joined by the handsome, the knowledgeable, the talented Fran Duffy of Philadelphia Eagles. What do we say? Of the Philadelphia Eagles? At Eagles Exos? How should we introduce you? Everybody knows who you are.
At Eagles Exos and the Journey to the Draft podcast. It's that time of year, Bo.
The Journey to the Draft podcast. Whew, those were the days.
I remember you
presented by AAA still, or what?
No. We are currently without sponsor for this month, but it was just ended a couple days ago. But I think when you look at you go back and watch those original ones with me, you, and C-Mac in our old version of Studio A, those were some interesting watches to how much we have grown on the air is interesting.
Talking so slowly, bad haircuts.
Oh, bad. Feeling the need to dress up. It was bad. It was
the
bad.
Full shot. Oh yeah, you got like our legs in the shot.
Yeah, it was not good.
Yeah, but it was fun.
Oh, of course. You look back on it. Those were some of the best podcasts.
All right. Well, we're gonna go full on beaks into the draft here. We have sort of refrained from getting really deep into the players and stuff on Birds with Friends. There's been so much else going on, obviously, for the draft sickos. I imagine that you guys have been following the Journey to the Draft podcast and everything Fran talks about. You can go position by position. He's got great stuff with Dane Brugler. Dane's got the Beast coming out next week. We're excited to dive into that. But this is going to be our initial foray into the players that we think we need to know at the top of the draft. And I want to sort of work through this like chronologically from the top down, Fran. And, knowing Howie Roseman, we have more evidence. We have a greater sample size of what he likes to do in the draft than most general managers, right? He's been in charge of 12 drafts, and just knowing what we know about him, having the 10th overall pick, knowing that he's probably thinking this is an opportunity to add a franchise like cornerstone caliber player, knowing the positions that he cares about. My assumption is that the way that things are played out here with 10 and 30, he would love to use next year's stockpile, which includes 2 second-round picks and a first-round pick, obviously, knowing they've got these comp picks coming. I think he would love to move up if he could, because I think he has learned the lesson that, like, with a premium pick, you want to take a guy you love. And then he could parachute down from 30, add picks for this year. Who knows if that's possible? We can talk about like the way that this draft may play out, that may not be possible. But I think like if Howie puts his head on the pillow and he's like praying for something to happen, I think what he would love nothing more in the world is like 4 quarterbacks go at the top, or maybe there's like that Tyree Wilson surprise, and somehow he could move up to draft Will Anderson. I think that is the player in this draft. If he could add anyone to the Eagles roster, it would be Will Anderson. That's me saying that, but for you, what makes Will Anderson so special? Why is he like the guy?
Well, I think anytime you're talking about a pass rusher at the top of the draft, people think of the Myles Garretts, the Chase Youngs, right? The guys that are just, physically dominant, physically imposing presences, the 6'6", 265 pounds, runs a 4.4. And that's not necessarily Will Anderson, right? I mean, he's 6'3.5". He's 253 pounds. He's got just under 34-inch arms, which is fine. It's above average, but not something where you're looking at me like, man, like, look at the way this kid is put together. He ran 4.6 flat in the 40-yard dash. Like, again, like, fine. You're kind of checking the box there. That's not what makes Will Anderson Will Anderson. I think when you look at the way that he has been able to consistently produce in the SEC. It's kind of been unheard of what he's done over these last 2.5 years as an impact player. 41 starts over the course of his career for Alabama in 3 seasons. And if you go back just to like last year, Bo, 101 tackles, 31 TFLs, 17.5 sacks in the SEC as a sophomore. And that is just eye-popping. And there are so many people, I know that, this is a big Ozzie Newsome thing, and all the people that have come from the Baltimore Ravens is like pass rush production is one of those things where that's something that translates well to the NFL. If you look at the guys, the Terrell Suggs of the world from that organization, and there's a lot of examples all through history of pass rushers, that production is typically something that carries over well. Will Anderson has produced at such a high level, both run game and pass game, that really gives you a lot of faith that, that's something that's going to translate to the NFL. And, as I mentioned, he's not the imposing presence that some of these other top picks like a Myles Garrett would be at the top of the draft. But, he reminds me from a physical standpoint, I think he's very, very similar to TJ Watt. And I think that, TJ Watt obviously has been very, very productive in the NFL. They win in very similar ways. I think when you look at his effort and his motor and the way that he's able to win high side, I think that's very reminiscent of TJ Watt. And Anderson also, like, for all intents and purposes, just A+++ off the field, every intangible that you would want. That's something that Nick Saban has said publicly time and time again over the course of his career, not just this year when he was eligible, but even going back to last year. And he goes to the combine. He's Will Anderson. Like, he doesn't need to do anything. He doesn't need to do anything from a workout standpoint. He went and he did everything out in Indianapolis. And then even at his pro day, everything that he was able to do down at his pro day, I think that just kind of speaks to the character that Will Anderson brings to the table. But when you look at it from an on-field standpoint, like the film checks the box, the production more than checks the box, and then intangibly, he brings everything to the table.
The production thing is interesting because we're going to get to the other pass rushers, but it's really in contrast to the other guys who seem to be at the top of this class. A bunch of those guys do not have a history of high-end, especially sack production. Those guys who are going to go in the top, 20 picks or whatever. Is it fair to say, though, that the idea, the possibility of Will Anderson dropping to 5 or something like that is pretty far-fetched?
Yeah, I mean, what you would need in order for that to happen is obviously the run on quarterbacks, right? You would need that the first time in NFL history, like the quarterbacks to go 1, 2, 3, 4, right? You would need all 4 of those guys to go right off the board, and then you would need a team to take Jalen Carter, right? And I feel like that's what you would need in order for Will Anderson to drop to that point. Now, the other aspect of this is that, and Daniel Jeremiah from NFL Media has come out and said that, not every team views Will Anderson as the number 1 pass rusher. There are some that view Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech as the better player. You look at Lance Zierlein, his latest mock draft that dropped this week over at NFL.com. He had the Houston Texans taking Tyree Wilson at number 2 overall, ahead of quarterback, ahead of Will Anderson, ahead of Jalen Carter. And so, I think there is a little bit of smoke to that, some people would view Wilson that way. That would be another thing that would allow Anderson to drop that far in the draft. So I guess we will find out here in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Coming to this as a novice here, explain Tyree Wilson to me, because this is a guy who played for 4 years, never had more than 7 sacks in a season. He doesn't strike me as the most imposing physical specimen. It is rare. I have that database of all the Pro Bowlers over the past now 11 years. It's rare for a guy to be drafted in the first round who played 4 seasons and didn't have at least double-digit sacks, turning into a real guy. There's Ziggy Ansah, who is, he breaks all kinds of trends. He was an old 2. You've got Hassan Reddick, who had 9.5 sacks, but only had 2 years as a pass rusher. Then you go to the back end of the first round. You've got Chandler Jones and Cameron Jordan. It's pretty rare. Sell me on Tyree Wilson, and if he's the pick at 10, is that exciting?
I think you start getting into the Trayvon Walker discussion from a year ago, where this kid is over 6'5.5". He's over 270 pounds. He's got almost 36-inch long arms, 84.5-inch wingspan, and a lot of the belief was that he was going to blow the doors off the combine workout if he had a chance to work out in Indianapolis. Now, due to injury, he did not, and so we didn't get a chance to see that. That's what we saw from Trayvon Walker. That's what kind of put him on the national radar from a media standpoint. Say this guy is legit. despite the fact that he did not have great production. And I think that's what you're looking at with Tyree Wilson. While you look at it and say like, oh, Texas Tech, like, is this a guy that, does he have that pedigree? Well, he started his career at A&M, at Texas A&M, and he was a bigger recruit coming from the state of Texas, ended up at A&M, transferred out after the 2019 season and spent his last 3 years with Texas Tech. And, while the production was never like truly special, like you mentioned, he never had more than 7 sacks in a year. He did have 7 sacks each of the last 2 seasons, right? So was consistently productive, just not like eye-popping numbers. Was a second-team All-American, first-team All-Big 12 player this year, but was just honorable mention a year ago. So it felt like, some of that name recognition, really kind of helped him from that standpoint here this year. But this is a kid that absolutely looks the part. I told you that, Will Anderson is not overly physically imposing. That is the thing that Tyree Wilson is able to hang his hat on, is he 1000% looks the part. And if you're able to get the most out of him, he's got that versatility to be able to kick inside. He can certainly rush off the edge. So there's a lot of projectable versatility there with Tyree Wilson's game.
Okay, let's stick on these edge rushers then, and we'll get to Jalen Carter after that. So you've got Will Anderson and Tyree Wilson, and you've got Lucas Van Ness and Nolan Smith, right? Another 2 guys who don't have that history of sack production. Lucas Van Ness didn't play as many years. He had 7 sacks and 6 sacks at Iowa. He was a part-time player there. He also, very funnily to me, 17 bench press reps, like, what are we doing here? Isn't this supposed to be a strong guy? I know that there's no correlation between that and success. It's just very funny. And then on the flip side, you've got Nolan Smith, who played for 4 years, freak athlete, but never had more than 4.5 sacks in a single season. So if you are selling the general manager on these guys are going to pop at the next level, what's the selling point for both of those guys?
Well, I think we'll start with Nolan Smith, since just kind of wrap that up there. I think with Nolan Smith, he's undersized, right? So he's 6'2", he's under 240 pounds. He's got shorter arms, and you look at that and say, all right, you kind of have an idea of your head the kind of rusher he's going to be. He's kind of built like Hassan Reddick, and I think the other big one that a lot of people are pointing to now is Micah Parsons, right? And with what he's been able to do, making that transition from off-ball linebacker to stud pass rusher, I think you look at that with Nolan Smith and say, okay, like there are traits here to develop. And then he goes to the combine. He's the heaviest player to ever break 4.4 in the 40-yard dash. Under 240 pounds, just under 240, he runs 4.39. And that's right off the bat, that's wild that he was able to do that. And I think that explosiveness does show up on film. And what's fun about Nolan Smith is that when you watch him, I remember watching him last summer. It was like last July, I believe, when I watched. No, it was last June when I watched him. I watched 3 games from his junior tape when he was a starter for that national championship team alongside Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean and the rest of that Georgia defense. But again, like you mentioned, just had 4.5 sacks. He only had 3 quarterback hits. But when you watch the tape, this is a guy that has natural power to his game. That explosiveness shows up when he goes to just explode violently into blockers off the edge. He sets a really violent edge as a run defender, and he could push the pocket as a power rusher while also having that first step quickness to win on the outside as well. And so he's a pass rusher that can win in multiple ways. He definitely has some cleaning up to do from a technique standpoint and from a pass rush plan standpoint. But this is a guy that can be a 3-down player, no question about it. In terms of his skill set, his tools, he's got outstanding pedigree. He was a 5-star player, a top 2 player in the entire country, regardless of position, coming out of high school. He was out of IMG Academy.
The point guard at Duke.
Yeah, he is just a ridiculous physical specimen. So I think when you look at Nolan Smith, there is a lot to like there. And then also, too, I said this with Will Anderson, you say this with Nolan Smith as well, all the intangibles you could possibly want off the field. And so I think that's the selling point on Nolan Smith. It
does remind of the Jordan Davis conversation last year, right? They're obviously a different type of player, but all these physical tools and all these amazing things you can dream on, but you still have to explain why for 4 years the production wasn't there. And yeah, it's the same thing, the shared production. Maybe Jalen Carter gets all of it, but it's just it's like you got to answer that.
Yeah, I think that's the tough part about it with, just the way that they play defense and not always just asking those guys to kind of cut loose and get after the quarterback, get into the backfield. Those guys are asked to kind of slow play their rush a little bit, play a little bit more contained. They do a lot of creative things from a blitzing standpoint. So there are times where, he's basically just asked to occupy blockers, or he's going to loop and kind of occupy the tackle or occupy the guard, and they're going to try and free up an off-ball guy from blitzing up the middle, right? There's a lot of those occasions on third down. So you kind of project that and say, okay, well, if we're just going to like let this guy pin his ears back and go, like that production could follow. And so I think that's the big thing you're kind of betting on with Nolan Smith. With Lucas Van Ness, it's a much different body type, obviously, 6'5", 272. So this is a guy who absolutely 1,000% looks the part. He's got 11-inch hands. He's got 34-inch arms. He 1,000% looks the part. Like he's got zero starts in his career. That came off the bench for Iowa, and that's kind of like eyebrow raising. He's a redshirt sophomore, okay, and at Iowa, they are a very traditional in terms of the way that they operate from a depth chart standpoint. So their upperclassmen are going to start, and I think when you look at Van Ness, you would say, yeah, like he's the most talented player, but he was coming off the bench. Now, he was very productive in that role. He had 19 TFLs the last 2 years. He had 13 sacks the last 2 years. He had 45 quarterback hurries over the last 2 years. Like, this is a guy that has been very, very productive. He goes to the combine. He tests pretty well across the board. Better in a straight line than, laterally. He's not like that natural, like bend the edge kind of rusher. He's more of like the power straight line player. But with his hybrid skill set, his ability to both line up off the edge and then also kick inside, there are a lot of people that, if you run a multiple front defense, which a lot of teams in the NFL are running these days, there's going to be a lot of value in a guy like Lucas Van Ness.
I mean, I'm hearing that. I'm hearing like a white guy in the Big Ten. I'm just thinking George Karlaftis.
Honestly, the other comp that a lot of people had was J.J. Watt, right? And I think that's
Okay.
the other one that people will pull in as well and say, like, okay, like, can this guy be J.J. Watt? So I think that's kind of what you're hoping for on the high side of it, obviously, as the future Hall of Famer. But I think when you look at Van Ness, he's probably a little bit different than Karlaftis, just like stylistically. But I think in terms of like usage, in terms of being a guy that can line up off the edge in early downs, kick inside in later downs, I think that definitely adds up.
So if you get to make the decision at 10, and let's say it's Tyree Wilson, Nolan Smith, and Lucas Van Ness, we really want a pass rusher. We want to, we want fastballs. We're built on the defensive line. Who would you be pulling for?
Well, I think that
who would you make the case for?
Yeah, I think that the way that you look at it is, especially the way that the Eagles are built, right? You can make a case for all three of those guys because you've got Josh Sweat and you've got Hassan Reddick, two different kinds of skill sets and guys that can be utilized differently up front. And so you're not saying like, oh man, well, they've got two undersized speed guys, so they need some size. You got to go Tyree Wilson, or they've got two bigger guys, so they could really use a fastball like Nolan Smith. I think that really ultimately, we know that the off field matters so much, and that's going to help kind of stack it there. I think when you look at Nolan Smith and you kind of say, all right, let's get the band back together with Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean, there's a lot to like there.
Okay, I like that. Well, speaking of getting the band back together, it seems like, few teams in the league should have a better read on like what to expect from Jalen Carter than the Eagles. They've got Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean in-house to give them some intel and to hopefully like bring him along if that were the case. They're always gonna lean on Dom DeSandro, who is like the best in the business at figuring out about these guys. The Jalen Carter fit, before getting even into what to expect from him off the field. On the field, how good of a player are we talking?
He's a great player. One of the things I love talking about with Javon Hargrave was his understanding of how the protection was going to slide to him or slide away from him, and then how to attack the protection that way. I saw Jalen Carter doing that kind of thing as a sophomore last year in 2021. And that carried through to this year as well, where he became a starter for the first time, did not have a start until this season. And when you look at his ability to be a disruptive force, he's such a loose, explosive athlete, truly unique movement skills on film. He came in at 323 at the pro day. He played a little bit later than that over the course of his career. But I think when you look at a guy his size, his movement skills are really kind of eye-popping. He's got a ton of range. He makes plays outside of a phone booth on the regular. And I think the arrow's just kind of pointing up with what he could be down low. And he plays with good leverage against the run as well. He was not always asked to be a 3-down player, obviously, over the course of his career there. Was kind of a spot player, first guy off the bench. And, what did everybody say? a year ago when you saw the record amount of defenders from Georgia that were first-round picks or that were draft picks altogether was, oh, well, the best guy isn't even in this draft. That's going to be Jalen Carter next year. And I think that, that's warranted. The tape kind of speaks to that, the talent that Jalen Carter brings.
I just think that, like, it seems like the way that this draft is set up at 10, if you stay there, you're going to be talking yourself into somebody, right? Whether it's those pass rushers, the corners we can get to, and if you're going to decide, like, do we make the bet on someone who we're not entirely sure about the player, but we love the guy, or do we want to make the bet on a guy who we think, if we can get him right, is a franchise cornerstone type player? It seems to me that Howie might make that bet, but they've also shied away from that stuff in recent years. So it's like the most fascinating angle to this whole draft process at 10 right now.
Yeah, certainly, and it's certainly, Bo, one of like the biggest potential turning points in the top 10, right? Because it could be anywhere from number 5 overall with Seattle. You could see Detroit at number 6. You could see Atlanta at number 8. You could see Chicago at number 9, right? So if all of those teams pass, then obviously he's on the board for the Eagles at 10, right? But at any point, he could go off the board, and that's what it's going to be one of the fascinating things to follow as the top 10 progresses in a few weeks.
All right, the other position that seems popularly mocked to the Eagles at 10 is corner. And we know that they've re-signed Darius Slay and James Bradbury, so it's not a huge need, but short term, but long term it is. Those guys are getting older. They need like a future number 1 in the holster. But do you want to draft a corner at 10? It's a little bit different, I think, in the Eagles philosophy than if you were going to draft an offensive tackle at 10, for instance, and you could wait for him to play. I think it's a little different at corner. They don't value it quite as highly. However, it seems like there are 2 guys in play here, Christian Gonzalez from Oregon and Devin Witherspoon from Illinois. It seems like the book is that Christian Gonzalez is a little bit better of a physical specimen. Devin Witherspoon, much more of a sort of Jair Alexander type, in your face, got that dog in him type guy. If you were making the case for who you would like to see at that pick, how do you stack those guys up?
Yeah, I think first you look at Gonzalez, and you mentioned just the physical specimen that he is. He's over 6'1". He's got 32-inch arms. He's just under 200 pounds. Like he is the how you want your corner to look on the outside. He ran 4.38 at the combine, again at nearly 200 pounds. That's a really good number. He's a very impressive athlete. He comes from a very athletic family, and that shows up not just at the combine but also on film. He's really, really fluid, really natural, really smooth. The one of the big knocks on him coming into the year, and I remember having this conversation with Dane Brugler on the Journey of the Draft podcast in the summer, because both he and I watched them probably like about a week apart. Dane watched them first, asked me if I had done them yet. I said, no, not yet. Don't tell me what you think yet. And I watched them again later. And then we both caught up afterwards. We're like, man, this guy is legitimate. He is really, really impressive. Now, that was at Colorado. That defense was awful. He had 0 career interceptions at that point. But Dane was like, am I crazy to put him in my top 20? Like if I put out my initial top 50 going into the year. And I was like, no, this guy has that talent to be that kind of a player. He goes to Oregon this year. He goes into the portal, ends up with the Ducks, and has 4 picks. He has 7 pass breakups, really productive this year as a junior with Oregon. And then obviously declares for the draft and now looks like a potential top 10, top 15 type of pick. I think when you look at Gonzalez, that lack of production before this year is a little bit worrisome. You'd like him to get a little bit better playing downhill. I think that he gets a little bit underrated at this point in terms of his skill set. I think that some people are a little bit too harsh there. But I think when you look at his competitive style, both against the run and then also in coverage, I think that competitiveness does show up at times as well. You pair that with the physical tools, there's a lot to like there with Christian Gonzalez. And then when you compare that to Witherspoon, it's kind of the opposite, because Witherspoon, he's a true senior. He's a little bit older than Gonzalez, obviously. He's played a lot of football. He's got 32 starts in his career. He is not the prototype from a build standpoint. He's about 2 inches shorter, and he's 18 pounds lighter. We'll see what he came in at his pro day. His pro day was literally like an hour and a half ago, and I haven't seen the numbers on it yet. I know that there was reports that he ran in like the mid 4.4s. That would be a good number for him, for Devin Witherspoon. But again, we'll see what he weighed in at, because he came in at the combine at 181. And the history of guys at that size at corner, is not super friendly. And really, it's kind of unheard of to see them drafted that high. It's almost like a Bryce Young conversation with Devin Witherspoon. And so I think when you look at Witherspoon, you mentioned like he's got that dog in him. He is so much fun to watch. He is extremely competitive, a ton of swagger, a very edgy play personality. I love that in a corner. He matches routes really, really well at the intermediate area. He's got outstanding zone coverage instincts. Like he is like that kind of like matchup corner. I think that he gets a little bit grabby at times. So you kind of like toe that line, right? And I think there's a reason why he didn't do the full battery of tests, at the combine. And again, I kind of want to see what he did at the pro day today. But I think when you look at the way that he plays the game, there's a lot to like. And Greg Cosell and I, your best friend, Greg Cosell and I, were talking about this on the Journey to the Draft podcast last week, just kind of talking through Witherspoon and his skill set. And he's like, he kind of profiles as what you would say like would be like a potential like elite nickel corner. He hasn't really done that in college. He's been more of like a boundary player. He's been a great blitzer, a great run defender. He's like an outstanding tackler. And again, that competitiveness shows up. And he's like, oh, like could he be like a Kenny Moore type of player who has been outstanding for the Indianapolis Colts for the last few years? Now, Kenny Moore was I believe, an undrafted free agent, coming out of the FCS level, right? So I think when you look at Devin Witherspoon, you say, okay, like can he be, a Jair Alexander type, a Denzel Ward type at that size? I think that's, if you're taking him that high, that's what you think he is. You think he can be like just kind of a smaller, but a big time like shadow corner on the outside. But again, it's just been kind of unheard of at that size.
It feels like this is maybe not the best year to have the 10th overall pick, right? It feels like there's a lot of guys in that area after the top like 5 where it's like you really got to talk yourself into something.
We talked about that. Yeah, we were talking about this in like September and October on the podcast, where it was like the class was starting to really kind of declare itself. We didn't know like about Lucas Van Ness at that point and a couple other guys.
We have this conversation every year, but it does seem like
but I think this year you would look at this and I think it's going to be one of those like beauty is in the eye of the beholder kind of classes. And what typically happens in a draft like that is that there's going to be a handful of picks in like that 7 through 18 range that no one had in their mock drafts. There's going to be I think it'll be an active like trade market where it's like, okay, somebody in the late teens really loves a guy and they see that big drop off that you're talking about. Hey, like this is our last, top 10 type grade on a player. And if we want to get him, we got to make a move, right? I think that it's going to be one of those kind of classes. That would be my guess coming in, where I think you're going to see a lot of activity and there's going to be surprises in that like 8 to 15 range where it's like, oh, no one thinks Bijan Robinson's going to go off the board, and boom, there he goes, right? Or something like that, where the Dante Whitner of the Tyson Alualu, the Tyson Alualu goes, and no one
Cleveland
had that,
Farrell.
right? Exactly. I think it's going to be one of those classes where I think there will be some surprise picks there in the middle of round 1.
Well, listen, us Fran Duffy fanatics know that cornerback is one of your strongest track records. So if you're making a bet, would you? Am I right in reading between the lines that it would probably be on Gonzalez between these two guys?
I actually have both those guys touching like on my on my sheet. I do think that they're really, really close. I just think that when you look at Gonzalez, he's more of the prototype of a guy that if you're going to take in the top 10, top 12, like that's the profile you would bet on, as opposed to Witherspoon. But that said, I don't know, like Witherspoon is like my kind of guy, like the way that he plays. Like, I know. I don't think he's Tre'Davious White, but I think he's like that kind of player, right? Like he's a little bit undersized. He's not like a super impressive athlete. Well, Tre'Davious White's Tre'Davious White. He's one of the best corners in football. I think that Witherspoon kind of has that. I think he has that kind of skill set. It's just in a little bit of a smaller package.
All right. Now, the last position to talk about in this area is the offensive tackles. And, obviously Lane Johnson has been extended, but it is not crazy to imagine the Eagles, thinking we've got a top 10 pick. That's the position we care the most about. Let's make sure that we are in good shape here. The worst thing that could happen to us is an offensive line cratering. We want to avoid that. So it seems like Peter Skoronski from Northwestern, Paris Johnson from Ohio State, and Broderick Jones from Georgia are the 3 guys who are talked about in this range. Recently on the Jason Kelsey podcast, when Howie Roseman was on, he was talking about how Jeff Stoutland sort of gives him the freedom to take like the tools at that position, because you can rely that Stoutland will coach them up on the technique. So if I frame it to you as among those 3 guys, who has like the most unique physical tools that you couldn't find later in the draft, what would your answer be?
I would say that's really difficult because I think all three of them do have pretty interesting tools, right? Like, Paris Johnson, like he didn't do the full workout at the combine, but when you watch him go through drills and you watch him on tape, like this kid is a really impressive athlete. And at 6'6" with 36-inch arms, like he is a good looking kid. So guys that are like that big, that long, that athletic, they're tough to find. Broderick Jones from Georgia, you would say you turn on the film, and the best thing that he does is make these like outrageous blocks in space, like in the screen game, on the move as a puller. That's where he really, really shines. He's a really fluid athlete. He gets from A to B really fast. He's got a ton of range as a blocker. And then you look at Peter Skoronski and you watch him and you're like, yeah, like you could see like why people think he could go in and be a dynamite guard. And some people even talked about him as a center moving forward into the NFL. At 6'4" and with 32.5-inch arms, like you question like, oh, does he have the length to play tackle? But he's got that skill set to step in and be like a dynamite interior lineman. And he had jumps, like he jumped out of the gym. Like he's got some explosive lower half potential there where you say like, yeah, like there's some power there that if you continue to pack weight on him, like he could be a really, really impressive people mover at the NFL level as well. And so I think all three of them do have impressive traits. I think when you look at Johnson, the fact that he is like the biggest and longest when paired with that athleticism, that probably gives him the edge. And I think that's why you see him typically go the highest in all of these mock drafts. You see him as high as like the Las Vegas Raiders at number 7 at times. And I think that's why is that, 6'6" with 36-inch long arms with an 85-inch wingspan that also moves this way. I don't know if you saw like those silly drills that they had him doing at the pro day where he like jumped up in the air and did a spin and had to get immediately into like a back pedal. It's like, yeah, like that's like silly. It's kind of ridiculous, but also wow. Right. And I think that's one of those things that, Paris Johnson brings to the table.
Well, plus with Dallas Goedert and Boston Scott, we know the Eagles love guys with city names. So
I would got to think they were one of the leaders in the NFL.
That's right. All right. Let's take a little break, Fran. We'll come back and set our sights a little bit later in the draft and some other positions that I want to talk about. Now that spring is finally here, the days are longer, the tennis matches are outside, the flowers are blooming, and you can spend some time on your yard. What makes the season even better is Sunday Lawn Care. Sunday is everything you need to get the lawn you've dreamed of. This spring, go to getsunday.com/birds and enter your address to get a customized plan created just for your lawn. No trips to the store or hauling heavy bags since they strip straight to your home. All you need is a hose to apply Sunday. You can fertilize your whole lawn in less time than it takes to watch an episode of your favorite TV show. That's because your favorite TV show is YouTube episodes of Birds with Friends, and they usually last about 2.5 hours. The other good thing about Sunday, well, they only use ingredients you can feel good about. No harsh chemicals, no long waiting periods, or trying to keep your kids and pets off the lawn. Simply apply, let it dry, and you're back to enjoying your yard. How about let's make that third rhyme there next time? Simply apply, let it dry, be a guy. Eagle eye in the sky. How about that? Sunday is easy and affordable. Some lawn care services cost more than $1,500 bones a year, but Sunday's full season plans start at just $109. And even better news, Sunday is offering our listeners 20% off. Full season plans start at just $109, and you can get 20% off when you visit getsunday.com/birds at checkout. That's 20% off your custom plan at getsunday.com/birds. Now, our next partner is a pretty cool product. Let's talk about Athletic Greens. Now, those of you who listen to Birds with Friends know that my co-host's sister's boyfriend loves Athletic Greens. If you're looking to get better gut health, more energy, or a stronger immune system in a really easy, natural way, you've got to check out Athletic Greens. I'm sure you'll all agree that most of us are not huge fans of having to take a bunch of pills or vitamins in the morning, or in the afternoon, or at night, or when you're sleeping. But with Athletic Greens, you can get rid of all those extra vitamin bottles and finally make some room in your cabinet. Athletic Greens is an all-in-one solution that actually tastes good. You will really enjoy getting your daily vitamins. You little Hulksters out there, you little Hulkamaniacs. So what is this stuff? Well, with one delicious scoop of Athletic Greens, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens. We love those adaptogens, don't we, folks? All of that stuff helps you start your day right, and the special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. All the things, baby. So, Athletic Greens. What do you need to know? Well, how about the cost? You're a little bit worried about price? Well, it costs you less than $3 a day, and you're investing in your health, and it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. Hey, listen, we don't know about your habits. It's cheaper than getting all the different supplements yourself, and you're investing in an all-in-one nutritional insurance. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition, especially heading into the flu and cold season. It might be a bit outdated, but that stuff, those germs, are still around, people. It's just one scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/birds. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/birds to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. All right, back on Birds with Friends, Bo and Fran. And I have to remember now to give a shout out to the winner of our bracket pool, Nick Grunsby, who was one of, I think, 4 people who correctly predicted UConn to win. Mr. Grunsby, Nasty Nick, congratulations. Reach out to us because we owe you like a spot on the show or a question or something like that. Maybe one of Zach's T-shirts. Fran, what
how behind are you with sending T-shirts out?
I mean, years.
It's just not like I hope that's not what he gets in as his prize.
Yeah, Nasty Nick will get something else. Okay, one player I want to ask you about, Fran, is Brian Branch, the Alabama defensive back, because it seems like he is like the top-rated safety, pretty consensus.
Yep.
But he was mostly a nickel back at Alabama, right? And so, what's the projection like there? It seems to me like if he could be a trade down candidate maybe from 10, or maybe a slight move up guy from 30. We know the Eagles obviously have a long-term hole at that position. It's not a position that they have focused on in the draft in recent years. There's a lot of guesswork at that position, but a player who I think is worth discussing. What's your thoughts on Branch?
Well, Bo, you've been following the draft cycle for a long time, and so you know how this goes with players like Branch, where we're in like November and December, and everyone's like, "Oh man, like this guy is a top 10, top 15 pick. Look at what he does for one of the best defenses in college football. He's Nick Saban's star on the back end of that defense. Look at his versatility. Look at the way he plays the game. He never misses tackles. Blah 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 blah." And then you get into the combine and he checks in at 190 pounds. He runs just under 4.6. He doesn't blow you away from like a physical testing standpoint. It's like, oh, you know, a safety who's that small, who doesn't run that well. Like he's good. He's not going to be a first round pick. And he was out of a lot of mock drafts. And then you start coming, everyone's like, hold on a second. This guy's a great football player. He's going to go in the 20s. And that's kind of where it feels like it's kind of settled in at this point in a lot of mock drafts. And when you talk to people, it's like, all right, like Brian Branch, probably not the athletic profile to go in the top 12, top 15. But when you watch the film, this is a guy who was one of the best shutdown defenders in the SEC. You watch him go up against some of the best receivers the SEC had to offer this year and more than hold his own. Some of the plays that he made in the middle of the field were really impressive. He was I think Ben Fennell had put this stat out, one of the best tacklers. I think one of the lowest missed tackle rates of any defender in this draft. He's just a really good football player. Whether he's playing from depth or playing over the slot, you feel really good about projecting him forward to the NFL. I think you can certainly start talking about like, all right, what is the ceiling there? But I think when you're talking like into the teens, into the 20s, you start like talking a little bit less about ceiling and saying like, if this guy's going to be a really good football player for a long time, you can kind of swallow that and say like, yeah, like Brian Branch, you feel really good about that projection.
Yeah, I mean, safety in like the late first round is not historically a great bet, but I'm always sort of like a sucker for the Alabama safety. So That's a hard one.
Not actually like looking at my stats now. Not only did he have like the best missed tackle percentage of any safety or any defender or whatever that stat was from Ben in this class, but he had a missed tackle percentage. This is according to PFF. He had a missed tackle percentage of 2.3% over his career. That's better than any safety PFF has charted that's been drafted since PFF has been doing college players. So again, just kind of giving you a sense of like that's what Brian Branch brings to the table, and he's doing it in the SEC playing for Alabama.
Well, and a safety in Philadelphia named Brian. I mean, how could you go wrong?
Exactly right.
Okay, two positions I want to talk about in terms of like late first, maybe trade down middle second, or even the late second round pick that I expect the Eagles to address in some form or fashion. One, we're going to go back to corner. We'll start with that because we know you are Mr. Corner. Emmanuel Forbes from Mississippi State, tiny, like rail thin, but a lot of ball production. Keely Ringo from Georgia, Deonte Banks from Maryland, shout out to Marissa, and Joey Porter from Penn State. How do you see those guys? What's the Stork rank in your mind of those four?
Well, I think it's the Stork rank is difficult just because of like the different body types and skill sets, but I can go through and just kind of give what's the selling point or what's like the knock on these guys. I think you said Forbes first, right? So Mississippi State set the, I believe it was the FBS, it might be all of college football, record for pick sixes in his career. Yeah, the FBS record, 6 pick sixes in his career.
Grandson of Steve, junior, as we've discussed.
Well, of course. 34 starts in his career. So the ball production was there. Has to get better as a run defender. We just talked about this with Brian Branch, and he had that missed tackle percentage of 2.3 over the course of his career. Emmanuel Forbes, 16.6. It's never been lower than 14% over the course of his career. That was this year. That was his best. So that's certainly an area that he's going to have to continue to get better. Yeah, right. But he will need to improve that moving forward to the NFL. Checked in at 166 pounds at the combine. I think he was right around 170 at the pro day. I have to go back and look at my notes there, but right around that area from a weight standpoint. So again, we talked about that with Witherspoon and how you don't necessarily see guys that are like sub 185, sub 182 that have success. Like Forbes is completely on the other side of it. 166, that's lighter than any corner drafted in the last decade. And he's 6 foot. He's over 6 foot. He's almost 6'1". So this is like a tall guy with long arms. He's got really good length, but he's just rail thin. And so that's going to be the knock.
Michael Jacquet.
Right, exactly. Which we know that was a favorite of Bo in training camp and a subject of many great training camp notes that you were so great at writing.
That's right. Okay, Keely Ringo.
All right, so with Keely Ringo, you're talking about a player who's 6'2" and nearly 210 pounds. He's got outstanding size, and he ran 4.3, 4.36 at the combine with a sub 1.5 10-yard split. So that is a big athlete who is moving. Like he is really, really explosive. He's really.
Why is he not talked about as like a top 20 pick? What's the knock?
Well, he was for a large chunk of the draft of the pre-draft process. I would say like all the way. I mean, he was like a top 10 pick in mock drafts going back to the spring. He was in the top 20 for most of like the college football season. And then I think you started to see like the word kind of got out that, like the NFL doesn't quite view him that way, but he's still like a good player. And he's probably more, in that area we talked about with Brian Branch earlier, where he's more like in the 20s and 30s. And I think that's where you're looking at with Keely Ringo. The one big thing that, has been the knock on him has been the ball skills and just his ability to find the ball down the field. He did have 2 picks each of the last 2 years, playing for Georgia. But I think when you look at just the ability to find the ball, that's been the big knock on him. Still a young player. I mean, he's going to be a 21-year-old rookie, redshirt sophomore, 2-year starter, playing for the best defense in the country, one of the best defenses in college football history. So there's a lot to like there with the profile, especially when you factor in the athletic testing.
Okay. Next up, we have a full-time All-Star, Deonte Banks.
Deonte Banks, I think, is kind of similar in that he's not quite as big. He's just over 6 foot, 197 pounds, but he was an outstanding tester. 4.35, 1.45 in the 10-yard split, 136 inches in the broad, 42 inches in the vert. Those are like freak show numbers especially for a guy who's near 200 pounds. So, I think when you look back, and even if you watch the film and you're like, all right, like this guy is a little bit inconsistent, like in coverage, a severe lack of production. He had 2 picks in his entire career, one in 2019 and one this past season. So like just not a lot of production there. But what we've seen at corner, and we say you hear this all the time, is it's a traits position, it's a stopwatch position. Tyree Wilson goes in the 4th round. I guarantee you, people are having that conversation around the league. It's like, hey, like we saw Tyree Wilson last year, and he was 6'4" and he ran 4.2, and everyone passed on him, and he goes to the 4th round, and he becomes a Pro Bowler in year 1. Like that's a position where you bet on traits, and if you're going to bet on traits, like you look at Deonte Banks, and this kid's just drooling with traits. He's got that ability to carry any receiver vertically. He's really physical up at the line of scrimmage. You turn on Ohio State and some of the reps he had against Marvin Harrison Jr., who's going to be a top 10 pick likely next year. And you say like, yeah, like this guy's got like that dog mentality to go and challenge players on the outside. But again, just there are some inconsistencies in his game, the lack of production, the inconsistency against the run. That's why he's not being talked about as like a top 10 pick, and why he's being more talked about in like the teens or the 20s.
And then Joey Porter Jr., who, as far as I know, like he's known for, aside from being the son of Joey Porter, like having a lot of penalties. Is that fair?
Yes. It was less so this year. I think he had 3 penalties this year. He had 10 last year as a redshirt sophomore. So that was a big bugaboo for him before. Now the other big one is, again, like this has been a consistent theme. He only has 1 career interception. He had none this year. So you say, oh, the lack of production, like that's bad. Well, this year, if you go to the one stat that a lot of people will point to for corners from a metric standpoint, is forced incompletion percentage. So it's basically like on a per target basis, how many balls were you able to get your hands on and kind of force an incomplete pass, whether it's a PBU, interception, or just like tight coverage that resulted in an incompletion. His forced incompletion percentage this year was 38.2. That was the highest of any corner, not just in this class, but of any corner drafted in the last decade, amongst the corners that have been charted by PFF. And so that's an outstanding number for a guy with outstanding height at 6'2.5", 34-inch arms. And you say like, yeah, like this kid like looks the part. He's great up at the line of scrimmage. He gets a little bit grabby, and that's going to be a little bit of a concern.
All I'm hearing right now is Byron Maxwell.
I mean, that would be a comparison that you would make, right? And so like that, but that's the thing, is that depending on the kind of scheme that you utilize, you're either going to be like really, really high on Joey Porter Jr., or you're going to be like, oh, he's just not for us, right? So I think that's going to be the big thing. And that honestly, I think it's the case with a lot of these corners. This corner class, I think, is kind of indicative of the rest of the group and all the other positions as well, where there's a lot of players that are being talked about in round 1 through round 2. We say like, yeah, like this seems like it's a really, really good class, but not every team is going to look at all of these guys and say like, oh yeah, like this class is loaded. You're going to say like, all right, this bucket, they are just for us. We are going to grade these guys as top 50 players, and these guys not so much. And so it's really going to be a kind of beauty in the eye of the beholder type of group.
So as you and Sean Desai, pass each other in the hallway, giving yourselves the the T for Temple U nod, and you go, who fits this defense best? Is there a guy who strikes you as like an Eagles type corner in the second round? The second round, which is historically a very good place to take corners.
I don't know. I guess a lot of it does depend on how they're going to play from a coverage standpoint, and that remains to be seen, right? And we'll see exactly how they deploy their coverages here this year. I mean, there are a bunch of names. Like you even get into like that second group, and that's why I do really like this corner class. Like DJ Turner from Michigan is really, really impressive. Garrett Williams from Syracuse, a personal favorite of mine. You go to like Cam Smith from South Carolina and Clark Phillips from Utah. Julius Brents from Kansas State is really talented. So it's a really good group. It's a really deep group, and especially when you get to round 2, you get to round 3. I think there are going to be some really good corners available for teams when you get to day 2 of the draft.
Okay. The other position I want to talk about, Fran, is running back, because I am convinced, just having thought through this, that the Eagles are going to exit Friday of the draft, so the first 3 rounds, having drafted a running back. I don't think it will be Bijan Robinson for the reasons that everybody knows, but I don't think it's crazy to think at 30 or especially in the second or third round that they might pull the trigger here. So after Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, the Alabama speedster, that second tier or maybe even third tier running backs, Devin Achane from Texas A&M, Tyjae Spears from Tulane, Zach Charbonnet from UCLA, Tank Bixby from Auburn, or if there's anyone else who you think belongs in this conversation, who would jump out to you as what Greg Cosell might call a foundational back. Is that his term?
That is a term. That is a term he'll throw out. I think when you look at A-Chain, I mean, he's sub 190. He's a small back. So to call him a foundation piece, I think would be difficult. He did have nearly 200 carries this year. He ran for 1,100 yards for Texas A&M. But I think projecting him to the NFL, to say that he would be a foundation piece, I think would be difficult. Even though, I mean, this guy is, electricity personified on the field. He's so much fun to watch. 4.3 speed, and that shows up on the
We call
football
him Ben
field.
Franklin.
Yeah, he's a fun player, and the Devin A. Crane. There's some bird pun possibility there. So I think that would be advantageous. But I think when you look at some of these other guys, I mean, you said Tajay Spears, right? He's again, I mean, right around 200 pounds, 5'9", 200, a little bit smaller, but he was dynamite for Tulane this year. They upset USC in the Sugar Bowl, I believe it was, and he was a big reason why. He ran for 200 yards in that game. He ran for 1,500 on the season, 19 touchdowns, a breakaway back. He's got excellent spatial awareness. You get him up to the second level, you get him in space, and he is always hunting for green grass, whether it's as a runner or as a pass catcher. I'm trying to go through some of these other names that you brought up. Tank Bixby, he's an interesting one from, kind of projecting to that foundation role, because, he's 5'11 and a half, he's 210 pounds, he's got long arms. And you look at him and say, like, this kid is built for being that kind of a bell cow back. I remember talking to SEC defenders after his freshman year at the combine, and just because one thing I'll always ask these guys in Indianapolis is, like, all right, like, who's the toughest guy you faced, or who's the guy coming back next year, yada yada yada.
You're always thinking ahead.
Always thinking ahead. And one thing, he showed up multiple times with who was the toughest guy you faced this year as a freshman. And I think when you look at Bixby, the amount of yardage he creates after contact, absurd. Nearly 77% of his yardage this year came after contact for Auburn. 77%. It's an insane number. Forced missed tackles at a really high rate. One of the best numbers outside of Bijan Robinson in this class. He's not like a pure breakaway running back, but I don't think that matters, especially for a guy with his skill set. So
he's got some real make you miss, man.
Dude,
he's fun to watch.
Bixby is really fun. And again, like, he played for a bad Auburn team these last couple of years. That team is not the same Auburn team of the previous decade. So I think when you look at Bixby, you say, like, as productive as he was, you could think, like, he could be even more productive moving forward to the NFL. Remind me again, who are some of the other guys?
Charbonnet was the last.
Charbonnet, yeah. So I think when you look at Charbonnet, he started his career at Michigan. He was a 4-star recruit coming out of Southern California. Goes to Michigan. It was just kind of like lost in the wash there. He did have 11 touchdowns as a true freshman, and then just kind of took a back seat in the COVID year in 2020. So then he transferred back home to UCLA and became the foundation back for Chip Kelly these last 2 years.
Zach's gonna love that, that.
Yeah, well, we know that. I think when you look at Charbonnet, he is definitely a bigger back. He's 6 foot. He's 215 pounds. He's got 32-inch arms. He's not a breakaway player, but in terms
Huge
of, like,
size.
If you watch him, it's interesting to think of, like, him as, like, the DeMarco Murray in that offense, right? Like, what do you say? Like, that he's kind of used in that same way. He's kind of like that hammer, a lot of, like, stretch zone, like one cut runs, like getting him downhill. So you can kind of see, like, the view that staff had for Charbonnet. I think that he's that kind of player. 22 years old, so not like super super old. He's seen plenty of football, and you kind of know what you're getting there with Zach Charbonnet.
So this is the one position that I've done, like, other than a little bit of wide receiver work with Sheil and Coach Flynn. Shout out to Coach Flynn.
No buckets yet.
Why not? What's that?
No buckets yet.
No buckets yet. I'm waiting for the beast. That way I can get all the 40 times
next week. Then
I've been, like, sort of speed running through the running backs, and I went through all their their stats. And the one thing I like to look at is, like, their yards per carry versus their teammates' yards per carry, because then you can sort of filter out for, like, bad offensive lines and stuff like that. And this was surprising to me. So the 25 guys, only 3 of them had a worse yards per carry than their teammates over the course of their college career. One was Tavion Thomas. That's, like, at the bottom of the list. So
he's a pure goal line back too. And I think that's part of the reason why his yardage, I'm sure, kind of got hedged. I'm pulling up his numbers real quick. Okay. Yeah, I mean, he had 21 touchdowns last year, 2021. 21 touchdowns. He had 7 this year, but he was a big-time goal line back for Utah. So that makes sense that his yardage number would be down.
The other, which is obvious, is Roschon Johnson, because he played with Bijan Robinson.
Yep.
And then the other was Tank Bixby, and that surprised me. What would you – because he was, of the guys to watch, he was, like, other than Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson, my favorite guy to watch. But so I'm I'm balancing like my eyes versus my pseudoscience.
What I would guess, and this without knowing the skill sets of his teammates, knowing how he was used in that offense, he was like the every down guy, and they did some like tricky, like gadgety kind of stuff too, like mixed in there. And my guess is that his teammates probably benefited from some of that, those kind of carries, and he was more the hammer. And so their yards per carry might have jumped up a little bit. And it might just be like a sample size thing. So that one might be a little noisy. That would be my guess.
A lot of carries, maybe a few more carries than you'd like, but
yes,
not
600 touches in his career as a 3-year player. So he's got not as much tread left on those.
Okay. Let's take our last break. We'll come back. We'll do some speed fire Woodpecker You Rathers and maybe close out with a pick six for old time's sake.
Oh, look at that.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Therapy is all about deepening your self-awareness and understanding, because sometimes we don't know what we want or why we react the way we do until we talk through things. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. Whether or not you feel like you need therapy, sometimes it's just good to have somebody to talk to. And that's where BetterHelp comes in. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. And believe me, otherwise, like finding a therapist in your area is a very difficult thing to do. BetterHelp makes the whole thing very easy. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/BWF today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/BWF. Okay, back on Birds with Friends. Bo and Fran, just two handsome guys talking ball. Just two concussion uncles. Guys being dudes. That's right. All right, I'm going to give you some scenarios for like this pick and this pick versus this pick and this pick for Woodpecker You Rather. So, Woodpecker You Rather, Fran, have Bijan Robinson and Miles Murphy, the Clemson edge rusher, or Nolan Smith and Jahmyr Gibbs?
Ooh. Probably Nolan Smith and Jahmyr Gibbs. But it's closer than you would think. I mean, Bijan is like that kind of player, like that kind of talent that would that could make you swing that way. But I mean, Gibbs is electric too. We didn't really talk about him. He's really explosive, really sudden. Yeah, the running back from Alabama, transferred from Georgia Tech. He was extremely productive, and an All-American at Georgia Tech in 2021. Transfers to Alabama, and that success carried over to the SEC. So that's a guy that pass game, run game can be really, really dynamic. So I think pairing that with Nolan Smith, and we talked about Smith earlier, I think that would give that the edge.
Okay. I'm going to do now a late first and second round pairing of defensive tackles and tight ends here. So let's say instead of going running back, the Eagles decide that tight end is their ticket for an improved offense. Woodpecker, you rather have Brian Breezy, the Clemson defensive tackle, and Iowa tight end Sam Laporta, or Georgia tight end Darnell Washington and Florida defensive tackle Jervon Dexter?
Ooh. That's a good one. I think I would probably go Brezzy Laporta.
Interesting. I thought you were going to go the other way.
Well, you know what it is that I think that, with the Eagles having Dallas Goedert, I think that not kind of like says like, okay, you don't necessarily need it to. I'd rather have like the higher impact player from the other position.
Okay.
And so I think I would go Brezzy from Clemson, who he is a multi-technique defensive lineman. He can line up over the tackle as a 4-eye and then kick inside. It's like a 3. On passing downs, was another high pedigree defensive player. Was a 5-star kid, number 1 player in the country coming out. The production suffered these last couple of years. He was injured in 2021, so he only played a couple of games that year, and then suffered an awful family tragedy this past year with his younger sister passing away from cancer. Then that kind of he had some other medical things as well here this past year that kind of impacted the effectiveness and things like that this year. So I think you look at Brezzy and be excited about that late in round one, and you look at Laporta and say, okay, like you're not worried about him coming in and challenging Dallas Goedert, but he can come in and compete for that for one of those backup jobs and play a potential factor there at the bottom of the depth chart.
Okay, I'm going to give you another defensive tackle pairing here. Woodpecker, you rather have Kalijah Cansey, the undersized but productive Pitt defensive tackle, and Syracuse offensive lineman Matthew Bergeron, or North Dakota State offensive lineman Cody Mock, and Georgia Tech defensive lineman Keon White.
Those are good pairings. I think I'm gonna go with the first one. It was Cansey
and Bergeron.
Bergeron. Yeah, I
of course,
think when you
the
look
son of America's Funniest Home Videos, Tom Bergeron.
Yes. I think when you look at Cansey, he's definitely a certain kind of defensive tackle, and there aren't really a lot of guys in the league right now that you would point to and say like, oh yeah, like this is who this guy's like. But we've had some very undersized defensive tackles in like recent memory that have been some of the better ones. If he came out 3 years ago, everybody would be pointing to Geno Atkins and Grady Jarrett, right? So I think when you look at what Kalijah Cansey can be moving forward into the NFL, like there is a pathway, but it's a little bit of a tighter needle to thread at that size. I mean, he's really small, he's really short, he's really compact, really short arms, really slight. So that size is going to be a concern for some people.
Isn't part of the benefit of having a guy like Jordan Davis that you can take some of the pressure off of a guy like that? You free things up a little bit.
Yeah, but it does depend. Not every not every rep is going to be like kind of structured that way, right? So if you think like again, looking back at last year's defense, if he's playing next to Jordan Davis, he's playing in the base package, which is typically on running downs. And so he's not going to necessarily be asked to just kind of get upfield. You're using him more in those sub packages early just to kind of get his feet wet.
But we're also expecting Jordan Davis's role to grow. So he's not.
Yep. So, yeah, I think you look at Cansey, that's kind of what you're getting there. But he's a really good player.
All right, I'm going to give you a wide receiver linebacker pairing now. We're talking late first and third round. Jordan Addison from USC and Alabama's Henry To'o, or Iowa's Jack Campbell and the official wide receiver prospect of Birds with Friends, Andre Yoshivas.
I think I'm going to go the latter. I'm going to go Jack Campbell and Yoshivas.
Good answer. You get me.
Jack Campbell. Yeah. I actually remember the day I watched Jack Campbell. It was the day of the first time I watched him. It was the day of the Eagles open practice over at Lincoln Financial Field last summer. And so it was that morning before heading over to the stadium, watching Campbell for the first time. They had another linebacker there who ended up going back to school. I think he went to the transfer portal, Justin Jacobs. We'll talk about him next year. But Jack Campbell, really big, physically imposing.
It was that much of a core memory. You remember exactly where you were?
I remember exactly watching it because I really liked
Heir to the Campbell Soup throne.
Yes, as you have to look that up and make sure you confirm that one. So I think when you look at Jack Campbell, really big and physically imposing. He's not the fastest, but he is a very fluid athlete, and he's got really good natural ability to work in traffic. He defeats blocks in every way you would want. He sees things really, really fast. He plays the position the right way. And this is a guy who's, again, he's not like undersized and slow and like on the slower side. He's a bigger player, and again, like moves really well in coverage. I would always say this about TJ Edwards is like, oh, he gets like underrated in terms of playing in reverse. I think the same thing about Jack Campbell. He's really good in coverage. He's just here. Are you going to ask him to play one-on-one against Alvin Kamara in space or Christian McCaffrey in space? No. But you would say that about 99.9% of the linebackers in the NFL. So I think you'd go Campbell there. And then Yoshivas, the guy, I'm shocked that there's not more love for Yoshivas, considering the skill set. A bigger receiver who is, we know he's a big time track athlete and all that, but also an explosive athlete, like from the jumps. The shuttles were also like really, really good. 4.12 in the short shuttle, 6.85 in the 3-cone at 205, like at 205 pounds. Like if you were to like kind of weight adjust that, just ridiculous numbers. And there's a reason why his RAS, his RAS score was 9.92, which is like one of the best in this class at wide receiver.
Very rashy.
So when you look at Andre Yoshivas, I can see like the comparison I made right off the bat when I watched him in the fall was Christian Watson from North Dakota State, who Green Bay usually traded up for in the second round. I say like, yeah, like you can look at Iosivas and say like, why are teams not talking about him that way? Or if you want to say like, okay, could he be like Mac Hollins, who is playing in the NFL still, signing contracts to be like a number 3, number 4 receiver. Had a nice season last year for the Raiders. And is still making plays in the NFL. I think Iosivas is probably like somewhere between those two guys from a like a talent and like draft slot standpoint. Hollins went early 4th round, mid 4th round. Watson went early 2nd, and so I think that's kind of what you're looking at with Iosivas.
It does feel like Jack Campbell is the name of like a 1970s All-Pro linebacker.
Yes, or like maybe, or like I'm thinking like a like an FBI agent, like
you're going Jack Bauer,
yeah, right.
Okay, all right. Last Woodpecker, you rather? Which sibling would you rather have, Tui Pelotu or Nick Herbig?
That's a good one. So they both are going to be listed with the edge group, but they're very, very different. With Tui Pelotu,
I thought Herbig was more of an off-ball linebacker.
He's actually played a lot of. He's been mostly a pass rusher. He's like
how is he at floating in water?
That's a good question. I don't know. I can't really speak to that necessarily, but I think when you look at Herbig, 6'2", 240 with 31.25-inch arms, like he's tiny. He's really small, but he's like a prototypical like Sam linebacker in today's league that people are going to say like he's probably going to have to transition to off ball, but no, I think that he gives you some good edge reps, and he's comfortable kind of doing that off the edge. And there is a role for guys like that in certain schemes. So Zach Bond played that same role at Wisconsin a couple years ago and was like I believe a 3rd round pick by the Saints. So we'll see if Nick Herbig ends up being that. I think when you look at Tui Pelotu, he's been more of like the impact player off the edge, both against the run and against the pass. He came in at 6'3", 266 at the combine. I know he's played a lot heavier than that. I mean, he was listed 290 by USC this year. And it was a guy that was, and it's not like, oh, that was bad weight. It's that he's got the frame to support it. And he played like as like an interior rusher at times. I actually had him with my interior defensive lineman coming into the year just because that's how he was used by USC. But clearly embracing more of an edge role, and it does have that athleticism to match up. So he's an intriguing player. I just think he can probably do a little bit more for you. His role will be a little bit more diversified going into the NFL. Whereas with Herbig, I think again, you're kind of like threading a tight needle in terms of how many teams utilize a player like that.
All right, Fran, how are we doing on time? You got time for a pick six?
I got time for a pick six. Throw it at me. We'll speed through it.
It's classic throwback here. Give me the pick six guys who you're surprised aren't getting a little bit more love in the draft process. Sort of guys who you might be higher on than consensus.
All right, so we talked about a couple guys already, so I won't say them. I'll say a wide receiver, Xavier Hutchinson from Iowa State, has been really productive, especially this year. I mean, if you're like if you're like a real sicko and played like college football, fantasy football, you were like, he was like a wide receiver 1, I got to think, because he was like insanely productive this year. He reset his own school record this year, 107 catches. He set the school record last year with 83. He reminds me so much of Amon-Ra St. Brown coming out. And I really loved Amon-Ra St. Brown at USC and Flex. And I think Hutchinson is very, very similar in a lot of ways. He plays through contact really well. He catches everything. He's a pretty good route runner. I just think that someone in the middle rounds is going to get a really good player there with Hutchinson. Probably more of a slot guy, but can line up on the outside as well. Again, kind of speaking to Amon-Ra St. Brown.
So the kind of guy who you might be able to throw a fade to on 4th down for his only target of the season.
He's a good player. I do really enjoy Xavier Hutchinson. All right, so that'd be one.
X-Man, love an X-Man.
All right, let's go Tucker Kraft, the tight end from South Dakota State. I was really high on Dallas Goedert coming out. He was a top 20 player for me coming in from the Jackrabbits.
Really good job here.
You got to do it.
You got to play the hits.
But I would say that Tucker Kraft, he checks a lot of those same boxes that Dallas did in that, line him up in line, move him into the slot. He can do a lot of different things. He's a good blocker. He's probably a better blocker than Dallas was coming out. But he's not the level of athlete that Dallas was. That said, of all the guys in this class, and Dane and I actually this week, we did a preview of all the pass catchers, all the receivers and tight ends. And we were like, all right, who's the best 3-down tight end from an early in the draft? I actually think it's Kraft. I think that he, of all the guys up top, and I really like Dalton Kincaid from Utah. I really like Darnell Washington, what he can bring, Michael Mayer. Like, there's a lot to like with all these guys. But with Kraft, there are less questions about everything he can do. He's not the pass catcher that Kincaid is. He's not the like the dominant blocker that Darnell Washington is. But he's like more than good enough at all areas to really give you a sense that he could be a really good player.
He's a good roto player. He's good in every category.
No, that's it.
Okay.
Let's see. I would say the next one for me. Let's go. Let's go with offensive lineman, because we know how much you love your offensive lineman.
That's right, baby.
Let's go. Let's go Steve Avila from TCU, who is probably a day 2 pick.
Sounds a little bit like Steve Vallos.
A little bit like Steve Vallos or William Vlahos, maybe from Alabama.
Nachos,
One of our first Senior Bowl trips together. I think if you look at Steve Avila, this is a guy who's got the ability to line up at all 3 interior spots, proven that he can line up at both guard spots. He's played some tackle. He's played center. I think a lot of people look at his build and say he's probably a guard. And he's just not like the sexiest player you've ever seen before up front. He's not like, a wow athlete.
He's no
not
Debo.
one of the, there's just not one of those guys where you look at it and you say like, oh yeah, like this is the offensive lineman you want to take with the 38th pick, and you feel really, really good about it. But I guarantee he's going to be one of those guys that's going to go like 38 or 42, and everyone's like, oh, who is Steve Avila? And he turns into a really good player for a long time. So I'm going to go Steve Avila. That's 3 on offense. Yeah, we did 3 on offense. I'll go 3 on D.
Okay.
I would say the next one, I'm going to go Nick Hampton from Appalachian State, who he really reminds me of Hassan Reddick in terms of like the build, the skill set. Did not test the way I'd necessarily expected. I thought that he would be a little bit better from a testing standpoint, but I think when you watch him on film, this is a guy that's got like Hassan, like has that first step quickness, has that bend to turn the corner. But what I like about him as well is that he's got a really defined pass rush plan, where there are guys that they're kind of throwing a bunch of different moves to the wall. Like, all right, let me just see, let's see what sticks. With Hampton, he knew like, all right, this is my fastball, this is my changeup, and everything kind of worked off of that. And I really enjoy rushers like that, where it's like, okay, like I don't need you to have 19 pitches, but if you've got like your fastball and your changeup, and you know how to use them and you mix them up well, and you know how to kind of tempo those and kind of and pace them, I think that that's something you can really work with. And Hampton kind of showed that. So I would say Nick Hampton is a guy, the pass rusher from Appalachian State.
6'2", 236.
Yeah, so very much undersized, built in that like Nolan Smith kind of role. But I would say Nick Hampton would be a guy that would check that box for me. Corner, I'm going to go Garrett Williams from Syracuse. And I think when you look at Garrett Williams.
Are you doing this just for Zach, or?
Yes, so we know that he will be excited. I would love to get Zach's field.
I feel like
he's got
Syracuse
notes on him.
corners.
There's not many, right? Who would be?
If you got to
Melifonwu is a good one. Is there another one after that I'm missing?
2 is a trend as far as I'm concerned.
All right, well, Garrett Williams. He's just over 5'10", so he's a little bit on the shorter side. But this is a guy who, kind of like Devin Witherspoon, plays with a ton of energy, a ton of competitiveness. He's a really fluid athlete, fast twitch, really quick in and out of cuts, very little wasted movement, made some great plays in coverage, 0 penalties the last 2 years, can high point and finish. His ball skills are really, really impressive. I think the run defense is a little bit up and down, but probably more, I would say more up than down. I think he's got the ability to come down and play the run. I didn't think it was like a hindrance on his game at all. But this is a guy that, again, has the athleticism, has the ball skills, was not a penalized player, and has that competitive edge. He was in a lot of round 1 mock drafts, Bo, like through most of the fall. And then he tore his ACL. I want to say it was the end of like mid-November, so couldn't test at the combine, and then he just kind of like lost steam. Yeah, it was the end. It was the end of November. He had a season-ending injury. So
you can totally see that as a thing for the Eagles. Like, we need long-term corner help, but we don't need immediate help. We've got time to let this guy. It's not the same thing as Sidney Jones. It's an ACL. You could totally see that, like late second round.
He was in mock drafts. Like, and that's I didn't study him in the summer. I didn't really know too much about him because he's a redshirt junior, so he was an underclassman. That wasn't. You
don't remember the day you first watched him, though?
No, I don't. Well, one thing I usually put in my notes is like, all right, like how did I discover quote unquote this player? Like what first put him on my radar? And honestly, like I just put it on my notes like mock drafts in September because he was in he was showing up in mock drafts in like the end of September last year, and I was like, I have not done Garrett Williams. I got to make sure I do him soon. And so I watched a couple games from early in the season. season and really, really liked him. I got to do a little bit more because he actually played some really good receivers this year. But I think you look at Garrett Williams and said there's a lot to like there. I'm surprised that he's not getting a little bit more love at this point in the process. Last one here. Let's go with. I'm going to go with a safety, and I'm trying to decide which one I'm going to go with. I'm going to go with Javarius Owens from Houston. This is a guy who's got a corner background. He's got a corner background, 6 foot, 32-inch arms. He's a little bit slight. He's 195 pounds, so he looks like a corner playing safety. But he also moves like a corner. Like, he's an explosive athlete. He's really fast. He's really fluid and smooth. He's got hips to turn and run. The ball production was really good. He had showed really good ball skills. I knew about him going into the process, and he was one of the first acceptances for the Shrine Bowl. And so I was like, all right, like I'm going to watch him soon. I hadn't done him yet. And then obviously the Eagles season was progressing, and I was like, all right, well, I don't know if I'm going to make it to the Shrine Bowl. So I kind of like put him on the back burner. I'm going to get to him as I get closer to the combine. And then the combine, preparing for the combine happened, and I just didn't get to him. So he was actually one of the guys that I had not watched going into Indianapolis. So completely fresh eyes as I watched him go through his position workout. And he was awesome in person, like one of my favorite DBs working out on the turf. And in terms of like the positional workout, he actually didn't run the 40. He didn't do the shuttles. He only did the jumps from an athletic testing portion. So it's not like, oh, he blew me out of the water that way. But when you watched him go through the field work, he was really, really impressive. And then I went back and watched the tape, and I was really impressed with him there. So Javarius Owens from Houston, again, like a safety with a corner background, really good movements. He's a good one.
Okay, I like that. Fran,
Bo,
you've been more than generous with your time.
I appreciate you having me once again.
And now I did ask this before. You may not have heard. What dental insurance do you have?
I have to check my T-shirts and see. Maybe I'll be able to find it.
Okay. If your interest is piqued in the draft, go check out all of the Journey to the Draft podcasts. Follow Fran on Twitter at EaglesXOs. And, if you see him on the street, say hi. And as you're driving down 95, you're likely to see his billboard. So try not to drive off the road distracted by his rugged good looks.
No word on how many accidents those billboards have caused yet. So hopefully
it's one of those tickers later in 95, like the TK days without a Fran Duffy related accident.
That's why all like the injury, like the launch, the injury lawyer billboards are up there. I feel like there's been a spike since those billboards have gone up, and I think there's a correlation there.
Yeah. All right. Fran, thank you so much. That'll do it for this episode of Birds with Friends. We'll be back, I think, next week as Zach and I start to get deeper into our draft thoughts, which are going to be much less incisive than those of Fran. But, you're going to listen anyway. So for Fran and Marissa and Zach and Javarius, I'm Bo. We thank you for listening. We'll talk to you later. And as always, we love you.